続いて、全体会合。
Next, we would like to start Plenary Session 1, Dialogue with IGES President and Guest 1, Synergy among Biodiversity and Climate and SDGs. First, I would like to introduce the panelists. Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Ms. Armida Alsjahbana. Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Ms. Elizabeth Mrema. Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development, Asian Development Bank, Dr. Bambang Susantono. And President and CEO of International Institute for Sustainable Development, Dr. Richard Florizone. And IGES President, Dr. Kazuhiko Takeuchi. And this session will be moderated by Dr. Takeuchi. So, Dr. Takeuchi, the floor is yours.
I'm very much welcome all of you to this plenary session 1 on discussing about the synergy among biodiversity, climate, and SDGs. Let me explain about the background of this discussion. When we talk about the causes of the COVID-19, we need to discuss about the inappropriate relationship between the people and nature, such as deforestation and rapid globalization or urbanization. And also, we also need to consider about the rapid impact of negative impact of globalization, because COVID-19 expanded so rapidly to all over the world. And these are the causes, but at the same time, these causes are quite common to the other global challenges, such as biodiversity loss, climate change, natural disasters, and of course, the infectious diseases as indicated by zoonosis. And therefore, we need to take an integrated approach to solve these issues. As I already explained at my statement, we are now trying to combine the global challenges to conserve the environment and preserve the biodiversity and mitigate and adapt to the climate change, and also try to integrate with the post-COVID-19 sustainability. And IGES has developed the triple R framework: response, recovery, and redesign. Response is immediate action taken as indicated by the medical care, and recovery is the process of changing the policy. For example, in Japan, we are now promoting the teleworking by utilizing of the IT technology. And for the long term, we need to consider about the transformation of our society towards sustainability. For example, we need to reconsider about the rural and urban linkages. So these response, recovery, redesign are the major background of our research agenda. But at the same time, I would like to emphasize that even in the process of response, we need to start to think about redesign processes so that we could really start our transformative changes. There are many important global agendas, 2030 Agenda and SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and post-2020 Biodiversity Framework, and Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. We need to take an integrated action in order to effectively achieve these quite interrelated goals. And also, we need to consider how we could apply these integrations on the ground, so locally implemented. And we also need to consider not just the institutional framework, but also the people's lifestyle need to be further addressed in order to transform our society towards sustainability. And now we are having the important discussion how we could combine these global challenges with Corona or post-Corona society. And this is a very basic background of our discussion, this plenary session. And we are fortunate that we are inviting 4 distinguished speakers. And I would like to ask first Armida-san to send us a video message, and then followed by the others. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my congratulations to the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies for organizing this International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific, or ISAP 2020. The forum provides a timely opportunity to discuss how the Asia-Pacific region can build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. Widening inequalities are exposing deep vulnerabilities of our societies. Sustainable recovery is crucial to spread the fruits of development at all levels, leaving no one behind. Even prior to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, our region had not seen sufficient progress towards achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Ladies and gentlemen, let me offer how ESCAP is moving policy actions at the regional and sub-regional levels in Asia and the Pacific. First, we must protect people and enhance resilience. COVID-19 revealed the great number of people and vulnerable communities in our region, including women and children, without access to basic services necessary to safeguard their health. To ensure a just transition requires recoveries that invest in social protection, improve access to healthcare system, and build resilient infrastructure, including for water, sanitation and hygiene, and ICT. Second, let us support economic recovery. We have seen unprecedented speed in government actions in response to the pandemic. There is an opportunity to support decarbonization and accelerate transition to renewable energy, which can create more jobs than fossil fuels. Economic recovery, inclusive growth, and carbon neutrality can be advanced at the same time. Economic recoveries and investment should be designed to support more ambitious nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, under the Paris Climate Agreement. There are no trade-offs between green recoveries that address climate and economic progress. Third, we must focus on restoring supply chain and supporting SMEs. Member states must focus on access to finance for SMEs and undertake policy measures to ensure stable and smooth functioning of regional trade and investment flows. Connectivity is critical to restoring supply chain. ESCAP is supporting efforts to facilitate the cross-border connectivity across all the 5 sub-regions in Asia and the Pacific. Let us accelerate digitalization through trade, e-commerce, and digital finance that can improve the delivery of public services to citizens and businesses and open new markets for all sizes of businesses. Fourth, we must ensure green recovery. We must take active measures in recovery strategies to reverse the loss of the region's rich biodiversity, which sustains our region and protect it for future generations. But we must rapidly develop policy actions that can secure long-term environmental gains. We need the post-pandemic future to leverage innovation and to ensure that economic growth does not recover at the expense of the environment. Ladies and gentlemen, with the promise of effective vaccine for COVID-19 by early 2021, we can continue to turn our attention to how we build that better. A just transition must consider how vaccination programs are developed to ensure access and priority to the most vulnerable population so that everyone everywhere is positioned to equally benefit in the post COVID 19 era. We need a whole of society approach that engages government, the private sector, civil society, local authorities, academia, international and regional institutions. We must enhance regional development cooperation and partnership in our uniquely interdependent and interconnected regional economies. ESCAP, along with the UN system, will continue to support member states to develop sustainable recovery strategies and solutions that will pave the way towards building a resilient, inclusive, and green Asia and the Pacific. I count on your leadership and look forward to working with all of you as we advance the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I wish you a very successful forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armida-san, for your very strong and very important video messages. I very much appreciate. Now I would like to ask other three speakers. I would like to ask the three questions to these three speakers. First question is, what kind of actions has your organization taken in response to COVID-19? I would like to ask Elizabeth-san from the UNCBD Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takeuchi, and good to see you. Thank you also for the invitation. And for the good question, particularly now as well, grappling with the impacts of COVID-19. Clearly, COVID-19 has told us or shown us that by protecting nature and preventing people from coming into contact with untouched parts of the world, we can decrease the likelihood of future pandemics. Accordingly, it is critically important that the world continues its work towards developing ambitious, robust, and effective post-2020 global biodiversity framework. The framework to be agreed later next year at our next conference of the parties in Kunming, China, which can contribute to increasing nature's benefits to people and play a significant role in building the resilience needed in the face of growing environmental, healthy, and development challenges. The results will be extensive, including improving global nutrition and access to drinking water, resilience to natural disasters, nature-based solutions to achieve Paris Agreement on climate, and of course, the reduction or elimination of infectious diseases, such as what we're experiencing currently this year. This pandemic has also shown us in clear terms that international cooperation is paramount for the health of our nature, our economies, and our people. The virus has crossed borders, affecting all countries, so its response equally calls for appropriate, consolidated global actions and solidarity. This will require a shift away from business as usual across a range of human activities. The recently published by the Secretariat 5th Global Biodiversity Outlook highlights 8 transitions that recognize the value of biodiversity, the need to restore ecosystems on which all human activity depends, and the urgency of reducing the negative impacts of such activity in order to achieve the biodiversity objectives. One of these key transitions is biodiversity inclusive One Health transition, where we are all concerned with the health of the people, wild or domesticated animals, and the wider environment altogether. In addition, the Satoyama Initiative, proposed by the government of Japan as the president of the 10th Conference of the Parties which adopted the Aichi targets, is a global effort to promote the sustainable use and management of natural resources in the production, landscapes, and seascapes with the concept of societies living in harmony with nature. The Satoyama Initiative contributes squarely to the second objective of the convention, namely sustainable use of the components of biodiversity. This was the initiative adopted 10 years ago at conference COP10 as a tool to implement Aichi biodiversity targets and the strategic plan for biodiversity, both of which come to the end of this year, but still a prime example of the initiative that promotes conservation of biodiversity and achievements of sustainable development goals. The Secretariat has been a close partnership with UNDP and the Global Environmental Facility to implement capacity building projects such as the one on community development and knowledge management for the Satoyama Initiative. Furthermore, the Secretariat, with the funding from the Japanese Biodiversity Fund, has continued to collaborate with the Institute of Global Environmental Strategies, which has hosted 2 IPBS technical support units to implement capacity building projects that aim to bridge the gap between IPBS assessments and policymakers in the Asia-Pacific region. The IPBS reports have clearly articulated the significant linkages between climate change, biodiversity, including COVID-19, and the importance of biodiversity in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Having a firm science-based decision-making process in place is critical for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth-san. I very much appreciate that you mentioned about the various activities from Japan, including the Satoyama Initiative and the EPBS Technical Support Unit on invasive alien species and so on. Very much appreciate your talking. And I would like to ask next speaker, Bambang-san, Dr. Bambang from ADB. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Takeuchi, and allow me to congratulate you and also colleagues from IGES for organizing this distinguished event. COVID-19 has clearly had a very devastating impact on Asia and the Pacific. Even though much of the region reacted quickly to contain the virus, including the strict lockdowns, the economic impact remains severe. One of ADB's study found that developing Asia economic losses could exceed 8% of regional GDP. And our latest Asian Development Outlook update estimate the region's growth this year could contract for the first time since 1961 by about 0.7%, before returning to 6.8% growth in 2021. ADB's first response was to meet the immediate needs of our developing members. Our initial $6.5 billion package was increased to $20 billion in April 2020, and working closely with our development partners helped us to mobilize an additional $8 billion in co-financing. In the short term, assistance focused on emergency needs, such as buying personal protective equipment and medical equipment, and helping develop national response plan and strategies. Today, we are increasingly focused on supporting our developing members meet their medium to long-term needs. This means building back better with more sustainable and resilient economies. And we want to ensure investment promote inclusive growth, benefit the poor, and protect the most vulnerable. Demand for our COVID-19 response assistance has been strong. One important thing we did was to create a COVID-19 pandemic response option, or we call it CPRO. This provides quick disbursing budget support for stimulus packages, health response, and also social protections. So far, including co-financing from other sources, about $16.4 billion of CPRO has been approved to support 20 of our developing members. This is in addition to humanitarian and health emergency grants for 29 countries and technical assistance to strengthen hospitals and laboratories. In addition, ADB board approved several internal policy measures and management actions to fast-track the processing of assistance. Some policies specifically aim to expedite approval and also procurement of critical medical equipment and supplies. Support to the private sector has been critical also to keep business afloat and keep workers employed. We have done this through direct financing to rejuvenate trade and supply chains. Our trade finance and supply chain programs have provided about $3.8 billion for test kits, medicines, and medical equipment, and for medical and food security supply chain deals. Micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise, or MSMEs, make up the bulk of the private sector and employ the most people in Asia and the Pacific. With financial and other support, they can retain workers and cushion the shock of this crisis. ADB has provided microfinance and guarantees for small businesses, including those run by women. I have listed some of our other non-sovereign project examples here in the slide. We also included a rapid online MSME survey in 4 countries, namely Laos, Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia, to assess the initial impact of COVID-19 and the containment measures on the MSME operations. The study's key findings and policy recommendations to support MSMEs were published in October. Going forward, we are in the process of developing a new facility with up to $9 billion to help our developing members access safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines. Supporting this, a technical assistance program will help countries conduct health system assessment to strengthen their capacity to effectively deliver and monitor vaccines. We are including innovative cold chain and vaccines tracking technologies in the program. Our main concern is those who need help the most, especially informal and newly unemployed workers, women, and those from other vulnerable groups. So I'll stop here for now and talk more about other aspects of the crisis later in the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bambang-san, for explaining about
Thank you very much, Bambang. Thank you.
the pandemic and your efforts in order to stabilize our society. Thank you very much once again. And I also, by taking this opportunity, would like to express my sincere appreciation of the collaboration between you and your organization with IGES. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Richard Florizone, President and CEO of IISD. Richard, floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Takeuchi, and let me join my colleagues in congratulating you. As Elizabeth has already said, international collaboration is paramount. So if we're to move quickly and wisely, we need to move together on COVID recovery. To answer the question about how our organization, IISD, has been responding to COVID, I go back to, it's really been framed by 3 points that our research showed was emerging in the early days of the pandemic and has continued to shape our thinking throughout. And you'll recognize these points also from our previous speakers. The first, of course, is, and as Elizabeth spoke to it, resilience is essential. It's been absolutely heartbreaking in this pandemic to see early on, especially, lives risked due to shortages of critical medical and safety equipment, sometimes including face masks worth less than $1. Those early days of the pandemic really demonstrated the importance of resilience. That is, the ability to anticipate, to plan, to cope, and adapt. And of course, resilience is also critical in preparing for climate change. The second point was Professor Takeuchi touched on it in his 2 Rs around recovery and redesign, and Dr. Bambang also around the medium and long-term needs. And that's about the longer term, ensuring that as governments race to implement economic stimulus and support packages, that stimulus is sustainable, that we ensure that those packages don't lock us further into a high carbon future. And the third point, again, touched very much on Bambang's points, is that inequality has been magnified in this pandemic. It's been an unprecedented global shock that has hit the poor hardest, including frontline service workers and women in developed countries, but of course, developing countries, even a greater impact. And so with those three themes in mind, I just want to give you a few quick examples. First, on resilience. At IISD, we're pleased to run the NAP Global Network. The NAP stands for National Adaptation Planning. And in the NAP network, we are helping over 40 developing countries react and respond and plan for climate change. That NAP group was established in 2014 by a group of developed and developing countries, including Japan, and it's currently funded by Germany, Canada, Austria, and the US. And its core focus is about embedding adaptation and resilience in how countries plan, how they invest their resources, and how they track their progress. And I'll say more in our next round in this panel about how this relates to COVID-19, because adaptation planning, we believe, is also useful in addressing other risks, including pandemics. The second point was around ensuring that stimulus is sustainable. And here there's a couple of key initiatives that we are pursuing. The first one is very much in collaboration with our good colleagues at IGES. Together, ISD and IGES are 2 of 6 core partners in the Energy Policy Tracker, and that's the website energypolicytracker.org, that is tracking recovery efforts and investments around the world. It's looking at supports for both fossil fuels and clean energy. And so far, as of this week, what we're seeing are those total numbers, about 165 billion in support for clean energy in the G20 plus countries, and 250 billion in fossil fuel. So of course, we're seeing, it's disappointing to see more support for fossil fuel than clean energy, but I would still say that this is a positive trend versus the Great Recession of 2008-09, where we're seeing a much better support for green energy. A second effort for us at IISD to ensure that stimulus is sustainable is the Task Force for a Resilient Recovery in Canada. And that's an independent group of 15 finance policy and sustainability leaders. It was chaired by IISD. And the recommendations for Canada to the Prime Minister were very much aligned with the emerging global consensus on green recovery, including things like building retrofits, investments in clean energy infrastructure, including hydrogen and electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and investments in nature, very important, which of course feed our first point about resilience and support adaptation. The third point, as I mentioned, is inequality. And we have to make sure that as governments focus on our own populations, that is their first responsibility, that we don't forget the developing world. And this is going to be a really important point in the year or two ahead, that we all continue to focus on international development and support the poorest and those who've been hardest hit by the pandemic. One of the efforts at ISD that is small, but we're very proud of it, is Series 2030. It's a partnership with the Gates Foundation and Cornell University to end hunger by 2030. It's using a set of technologies, including machine learning, to find the very best policy interventions that can actually end hunger. And the result is that we found by doubling investment in the next 10 years, we can actually end hunger while also doubling income for the poorest farmers and meet climate goals. So some exciting possibilities. Like any crisis, COVID-19 amplifies existing risks and weaknesses. And with these 3 examples in resilience, in green stimulus, and inequality, these, I think, are 3 ways that we can respond to the pandemic, but also build a more sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for your clear message, insisting the importance of resilience is essential, and stimulus must be sustainable. And third, inequality is magnified. Particularly inequality issue is quite important in the context of Asia and Pacific. By taking this opportunity, I would like to congratulate you on your quite clear messages that you are now sending to the global community, and I'm very much looking forward to further collaborating with your institute, IISD. Thank you very much. Now I would like to move to the next question to the speakers. How is your organization creating synergies between your effort to tackle COVID-19 and those to address priority issues such as climate change, SDGs, and biodiversity? I would like to once again ask Elizabeth-san to take a floor.
Thank you very much again, Professor Takeuchi. In response to that question, once again, I would like to underline that biodiversity remains an answer to several sustainable development challenges that we all face. From nature-based solutions to climate, food and water security, sustainable livelihoods, biodiversity remains the basis of sustainable future. This is all integral to achieving the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, which risks being undermined as the result of the pandemic. As I had mentioned earlier, the perils of biodiversity loss are interrelated with the increased risk of infectious diseases, and this links directly to SDG 3 on health. However, conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity is equally linked to the achievement of other SDGs. Biodiversity, for instance, is highlighted specifically under SDG 14 and 15, but interweaves also with a wider range of other SDGs. And in fact, 14 of the 17 SDGs depend on biodiversity contribution. For instance, biodiversity plays an important key role in achieving food security and improved nutrition called for under SDG 2, as well as the provision of clean water under SDG 6. Moreover, achieving several other SDGs will subsequently contribute to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And this includes a number of SDGs and associated targets that focus on key drivers of biodiversity loss. For instance, climate change, pollution, or overexploitation of resources by addressing unsustainable production and consumption patterns called for under SDG 12, inefficient use of natural resources and reduction of food waste, or working towards sustainable cities under SDG 11 through integrated sustainable planning, protection of natural heritage, and provisions of green spaces. With regard to SDG 13 on tackling climate action, the interaction with biodiversity objectives are particularly compelling. Limiting climate change below 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees Celsius is essential for preventing climate impacts from overwhelming all other actions in support of biodiversity. Conversely, incorporating nature-based solutions in climate adaptation and mitigation measures will help communities tackle threats from climate change impacts while also providing benefits and co-benefits to ecosystems. Keeping in mind that climate objectives and SDGs post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework builds upon the strategic plan of the Biodiversity 2011-2020, with its agreed, which was agreed also in 2010, as I indicated earlier on. And the post-2020 framework incorporates already in its draft form lessons learned from the last decade in terms of setting out an ambitious plan to implement broad-based actions to bring about a transformation in society's relationship with biodiversity and be able to ensure, hopefully by 2050, a shared vision of living in harmony with nature to be fulfilled. The aim is to galvanize urgent and transformative actions by governments and all societies, thus taking into account the whole of government and society approach, where we include biodiversity in all aspects of government and society, including in key economic sectors such as agriculture, energy, infrastructure, urban development, and the list goes on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your very strong message. And you emphasize the importance of keeping the global goal of making a society in harmony with nature, which was proposed in Aichi, Nagoya Prefecture. Aichi Prefecture, Nagoya City. And I very much appreciate that you also mentioned the linkage between the climate change and biodiversity. For example, you emphasize the importance of nature-based solution. These are the very important issues, and we are very much looking forward to further collaborating with you in Kunming, China next year. Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Bambang-san from ADB to take a floor.
Thank you again, Professor Takeuchi. The pandemic dramatically reinforced one clear message. Most of our region's developing countries are not investing enough to meet the SDGs and address climate change. In fact, Asia-Pacific region is off track in achieving the SDG targets even before the pandemic. So I'd like to speak briefly about our COVID-19 related work on especially 3 SDGs. First one is on the climate change, which is SDG 13, waste management, which is SDG 12, and gender, which is SDG 5. On the first one, climate change, the need for climate action was clear well before the pandemic. The recovery gave us an even stronger case for risk-informed decision-making and mainstreaming resilience. We need to better manage climate and disaster-related shocks and a looming biodiversity crisis. ADB published a paper in August called A Pathway to a Low Carbon and Resilient Future. It covers, first, example of recovery interventions, including labor market program to protect natural assets, such as wetland and green infrastructure, such as off-grid renewable energy system, and an assessment framework to help decision makers to understand the opportunity and potential risks and prioritize interventions. On the second one, on the waste management, the pandemic led to a surge in the volume of infectious medical waste. For example, in Hubei province in the People's Republic of China, waste increased 600% per day during the height of the outbreak. And to ensure worker safety, we published guidance on managing COVID-19 medical waste in April and created an online data room of reference materials and information on disinfection and sterilization technologies. Single-use plastic and packaging has also increased dramatically. In Bangkok, people used 62% more plastic in April than a year earlier. Most of it food packaging not easily recycled. Some countries have been overwhelmed, facing difficulties safely transporting and also disposing this waste. And it is undermining hard-earned success in reducing single-use plastic and plastic pollution. So as part of ADB Healthy Ocean Action Plan, we are addressing this increased COVID-19 waste by helping countries boost investment in collecting and treating plastic waste where it leaks into the oceans. Indonesia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam all participate, and we are looking at expanding this to other countries. Third area on gender, I'd like to highlight how we promote gender equality in our COVID-19 response. With poor and low-income women and girls among the most severely affected by the pandemic, all our COVID-19 response program include gender targets. Our ADB Strategy 2030 Operational Plan for Gender Equality has a corporate gender equality target of 75% of all our operations by 2030. Our social protection assistance include cash transfer and food subsidies for women and girls in vulnerable households. And let me give you one example. In India, at least 50 million poor women will receive additional cash transfer, and at least 60 million will be given cooking gas cylinders. So let me also invite all of you that we work together to not only bounce back in achieving the SDG, but also to bounce back forward in trying to mobilize our efforts achieving the SDG target. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bambang-san, for explaining about the SDGs issues, particularly with the COVID-19 era. I would like to also appreciate you mentioned about plastic pollution, which is a very important issue after the COVID-19, particularly in Asia and Pacific. I would like to further collaborate with ADB on this issue and other issues as well. Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask the Richard-san for delivering his statements.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Well, I think we can all agree that recovering from this pandemic and preventing another one with such far-reaching impacts means investing in measures that are green, that are fair, that are positive for biodiversity, as Elizabeth has argued so eloquently for, and that are resilient to a range of shocks and stresses. I think the point I want to make is I believe that national adaptation plans provide a basis for making such investments. So, of course, when we create those national adaptation plans, or NAPs, we're looking for priorities that make a country more climate resilient. But because climate change touches so many aspects of our societies and our economies and our ecosystems, these plans are also useful for addressing other risks and development objectives. So, for example, in Fiji, the demand shock and supply chain disruptions from COVID really highlighted their need to be more self-sufficient in food production. And if you look back at their NAP, investments in climate-smart agriculture was really one of the priorities that emerged from the national adaptation planning in Fiji, and that would be key to securing the country's food production. We also know that in a number of countries, COVID responses have often emphasized the importance of water and sanitation, and Bambang spoke to some of these issues. And of course, this can be challenging for semi-arid developing countries like South Africa, which face real limitations on the quantity and quality of water. Now, again, through NAPs, we can prioritize investments in nature-based solutions like wetland rehabilitation that can increase the access to water, that they can buffer those climate risks and also protect biodiversity. In fact, really, I would again say that nature-based solutions, as identified in our adaptation plans, that's where we can really see these agendas of climate action, of biodiversity, of conservation and pandemic relief and recovery all coming together. In fact, I'd refer back to the study out of University of Oxford in March that just looking on an economic basis, an environmental basis, investments in nature and nature-based solutions was identified as one of the top priorities, whether it's forest landscape restoration, mangrove planting, grasses. These can all be scaled up in the name of climate adaptation, but also biodiversity conservation and pandemic recovery, meaning the job creation and the economic multipliers. So that's one of the areas. I mentioned our national adaptation, our NAP global network. We'll continue to expand that. We have a new partnership with the GEF on to boost investment in nature-based infrastructure. I think in summary, what I'd say on this round is I think that COVID has really reinforced the multiple dividends of investing in adaptation. And so, therefore, at ISD, we are really focusing our efforts to help developing countries to both identify and implement their national adaptation plans, or NAPs, as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. You are mentioning about the importance of a nature-based solution in order to integrate global agendas. And also, you mentioned about the national adaptation plan. In Japan, we are now starting to consider about the nature-based adaptation plan. during the discussion of the governmental organization. It's called the Central Environment Council, and we are willing to collaborate with other countries how they could apply this NAP for integrating the other fragmented activities, including the agriculture, urban systems, and medical care, and so on. So thank you very much. Now I would like to move to the next question. Again, first to Elizabeth-san, what is necessary for us to redesign our society for the longer perspective?
Thank you, Prof. An important question, considering where we are now with COVID-19. The expansion of the global economy over the last 50 years has also caused a rapid degradation of the ecosystems and biodiversity, resulting in enormous stress being placed on natural systems that supply our food, water, and other benefits. Today, we are becoming increasingly aware that biodiversity loss and increased risks of zoonotic diseases such as COVID-19 have common root causes. Therefore, more than ever before, the implementation of the biodiversity inclusive One Health transition is vital, where we are concerned with the health of the people, the animals, and wider environment altogether, thereby uncovering the common drivers of biodiversity loss, disease risks, and ill health. The present COVID-19 pandemic has served us as a stark reminder that urgent, sweeping international cooperation is needed to preserve nature, conserve biodiversity, and protect human health for generations to come. While the world is striving to end the pandemic, we all need to take urgent action to build a resilient and sustainable global economy that incorporates nature at its heart, even as we build back better from this crisis. We cannot continue the business as usual or return to the normal of yesterday. And I believe that the post-2020 biodiversity framework will be a major step forward towards bringing about the transformative changes needed to our society. Therefore, let us all work together to realize the UN 2050 vision of biodiversity, a society where all will live in harmony with nature by finding solutions in nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your message on how we could transform our society toward sustainability by applying of the concept of biodiversity conservation. I would like to emphasize the importance of the Kunming Biodiversity Conference, which is expected to be organized next year, which will be the very important opportunity to try to combine the various global agendas with the society in the post-COVID-19, particularly from the viewpoint of biodiversity conservation. This is crucial for us to consider. And I think that the post-2020 biodiversity framework could be integrated with the post-COVID-19 society. And therefore, I very much appreciate your continuous effort as an executive secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Now I'd like to move to next speaker, Dr. Bambang. Bambang-san, floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Takeuchi. I joined my colleague earlier that this is a very strategic and also important question. Redesigning our society is an enormous and a very complicated undertaking. So I'd like to briefly touch on three points that I think are critical to this effort. One is our ADB One Health approach. Second, on sustainable business and infrastructure, and also the third one on the sustainable city. On the first, the One Health approach, we need to broaden our definition of resilience to achieve a holistic and sustainable recovery from this pandemic. We have been focusing on financial resilience since early on, but then we broadened our thinking around climate resilience. Today, in the age of the pandemic, we are expanding the concept to a One Health approach, which is cognizant of the complex interconnections between the health of the people, animal, plants, and our shared environment. This is in line with the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. One thing is clear, we cannot return to business as usual, and we need to stop environmentally destructive investments that cause disease outbreaks, decrease biodiversity, or harm the communities. Ensure environmental regulations and commitments that not and roll back, and this will avoid compounding risks to stressed healthcare and also economic system, and also boost investment in green business and jobs that help the environment. Second point that I would like to talk is on sustainable business and infrastructure, which can be tackled through supporting micro and small medium enterprise, the MSMEs, mobilizing finance for green investment, and strengthening framework that spur green businesses. Infrastructure will be a key part of recovery spending. For example, investment in water supply, sanitation, and health facilities should take priority over any carbon-intensive investment. New infrastructure should be green, low carbon, and climate resilience, and provide sustainable services. We should follow also the G20 principle of the quality infrastructure investment. And the third and the last point is on the sustainable cities. We need to redesign our cities to make them more resilient against shocks and stress due to pandemic, disasters, and also climate change. In Asia and the Pacific, the pandemic mostly hurt the urban poor. People in informal settlements have difficulties accessing clean water for hand washing and physically distancing from one another. There are several things cities can do immediately to respond to COVID-19 and future diseases. First, public spaces, buildings, and civic institutions should be remodeled to reduce the virus spread. Second, they can ensure that essential urban services are available, including water, sanitation, and hygiene services, along with better solid and medical waste management. And third, the special need of informal settlements and vulnerable people must be also addressed. Fourth, lastly, we can employ more on the digital solutions to do this one. So in addition to broader definitions of resilience, as I talked about earlier, to achieve a sustainable recovery, we also need to go back and readdress old issues, such as basic health, sanitation, and also air quality. So let me call this also the 3 Rs, which is recover, readdress, and resilience for the next normal. We at ADB will continue to support our members together with other partners like you, and to recover through addressing some of the long-standing basic issues, to readdress key issues by adding in protections of nature and biodiversity to prevent another pandemic, and to strengthen comprehensive resilience. So by doing so, we can turn this crisis into an opportunity to achieve a more holistic, sustainable, and inclusive development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bambang-san, for emphasizing the importance of enhancing resilience. I would like to say that planetary health needs to be combined with people's health. So both the people and planet need to be healthy. And I also would like to thank you for emphasizing the importance of medium and small-sized enterprises, which are the key to achieve the global sustainability. Not just big enterprises, but also these enterprises are key to really transform our society towards sustainability. So there are many other issues he emphasized, but I would like to ask the next speaker, Richard-san, to take the floor on the same questions that I raised.
Thank you, colleagues. It's a big question, and in many ways, Professor Takeuchi, you answered it for us at the beginning with the RRR, because of course, to redesign society, we need that response, recovery, and redesign. I thought that was a very good framework. I'll reflect on Bambang's and Elizabeth's comments also by giving my own three. My three are speed, people, and resilience. So, which are much more general, but just to explain them, first, speed. The response, as I said earlier, has been much more climate positive than the response we saw in 2008-09 to the Great Recession. But it's still not enough to meet the Paris goals or 2050. So we know we need to move faster, we need to move in partnership, and we know we need to rebuild multilateralism. And that's why meetings like today are so important. Linking back under this first point of speed, Bambang's point about sustainable business and infrastructure, we should be encouraged and seek to build on that. The momentum on ESG investing is really quite remarkable, the private capital moving in these directions and some of the private sector commitments we're seeing. So I think we have to find new ways to work, not just with governments, but with private capital to get the speed that we need. Second is people. So, and I know that sounds simple, but for a just transition, attending to those most directly impacted by climate and to the workers, that's the most important thing. And I'll say that as you're thinking about responses, I find that the people or the worker lens is a very powerful criteria for prioritizing and shaping initiatives. I'll give you a brief example. In Canada, when the downturn first hit, there was lots of calls for government to invest in the energy industry, oil and gas. And we thought, oh my goodness, if you do that, you'll just reinforce the high carbon pathways. But the proposal that came out was to then invest in orphan wells and in methane reduction, which, in some ways is still a fossil fuel subsidy. But what it did is it put oil and gas workers back to work, doing something that was also positive for the environment. So I think by looking through people and what's going to improve the lives of people, that is also, I think, a simple lens that can help us. Third, of course, it won't surprise you that I'll mention resilience. Come back to what I said at the beginning, that COVID has demonstrated that we must get better at planning, at predicting, and at responding. And just as we must do for COVID and for pandemics, so we should do for climate. And I think Elizabeth spoke well to this, that when we invest for climate adaptation, we're also investing in nature and biodiversity. Let's try to do both of those together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard-san, for emphasizing the importance of other issues as you raised the speed, the people, and responses. And we still have some time. I would like to ask one of the speakers to talk about what we need now at this moment in order to achieve the various global challenges, including the climate change, biodiversity, and the achievement of SDGs. So first, I would like to ask Elizabeth-san for making your closing remarks and emphasizing on what you think is important.
Thank you very much, Prof. The challenges we face, we all know. We know the problems, we know now the causes, we also know how to deal with them. I think the issue is actually to take those actions to deal and solve the problems we have. We are all talking of moving or getting out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the post-COVID-19 recovery needs to be resilient, greener, sustainable. And this has to be built into those stimulus recovery packages from the beginning, to be able also to deal with preventive measures to avoid future pandemics. COVID-19, clearly scientists are telling us, will not be the last. We knew it was not the first, We got the science, we didn't heal to the messages. We were hit with COVID-19. It is not the last. So preventive measures need also to be part of the recovery of COVID-19. So again, greener, sustainable, building in the risks assessment, recovery, prevention to avoid future pandemics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to participate in the next COP held in Kunming, hopefully next year. I would like to ask...
Looking forward.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing you in Kunming. I would like to ask Dr. Bambang-san for delivering your final remarks.
Thank you again, Professor Takeuchi, and also all the IGES colleagues for having this important event. I would like to point out three brief keywords. Two of them are very much the same with Richard's point, because I also agree completely with Richard's point. First one is on the people. I think that people should be a center of the whole actions and also program. We call it sometimes a people-centered action plan or something like that. But it is the people that really matter, and we should put it in the center by having more participatory actions plan and also participatory program that is being delivered on the ground. So people, number one. Second one is speed, as also Richard mentions. I think speed is very essential, but in doing the speed, we should also include the stakeholders' participation. As I told you also in the first keywords on the people. So participatory planning and partnerships, I think, is one of the key if you want to have a speed, but also something that really impactful on the ground. And the importance of the local actions rather than a rhetoric on the national level action plans or program, I think is very important. We have, for example, the VNR on the national level, but it's very important to have that translated into the local one, the local voluntary whatever programs that I think that can be translated from the VNR at the national level. That's the same also like NDC. NDC is at the national level, but perhaps we can also have a more concrete actions on the ground and the grassroots level by translating that more in doable measures of the LDC, local determined contributions. So speed at the local level is very essential. And lastly, I think that we cannot do alone. This is a gigantic task that we have to do, and partnership is very important. That is why we, like all organizations that is here, should working together in trying to tackle this pandemic that is, for me, is unprecedented. Thank you very much, and congratulations again to IGES.
Thank you very much, Bambang-san, for emphasizing the importance of partnership. In fact, you kindly came to Japan to attend the inauguration ceremony of the AP Asia Pacific Platform on Adaptation, which was held in Karuizawa in Nagano Prefecture. And also, you are very kind that you agreed to attend the Science Council of Asia meeting, and we could have a very good discussion at that time. And thank you very much once again for your great contribution. And I would like to ask now to Dr. Richard San for delivering your closing remarks.
Colleagues, it's both easy and difficult to go last. Easy because I can build on all the wisdom from my wise colleagues. Difficult because I have to think of something new to say. Look, I think that Elizabeth captured it well with the word action. We know that we should reject the false compromise between the economy and the environment, right? We know there's a remarkable global consensus now around the kinds of measures we can take that are good for people, that are good for the economy, that are positive for the environment and biodiversity, right? They've been researched and spoken to, and they're in a number of countries' pandemic recovery plans. investments in their adaptation plans, investments in energy building retrofits, investments in nature, investments in clean energy infrastructure, right? We know the answers. That's not the problem. The problem is driving to action, as Elizabeth said. And I think, again, building on some of the things Bambang said, how do we get that action? Well, that's always going to depend. It's going to depend on people. It's got to be high level. It's got to be grassroots. But we have to push ourselves, all of us here today, push ourselves, I think, for new kinds of partnerships for action. We have to realize that multilateralism is absolutely essential, but it's also not sufficient. Right? We've got to find these new partnerships. Bambang mentioned cities. We know certainly in North America, a lot of the best progress is being made at the civic level. Focus on cities. Focus on the private sectors I spoke to earlier, where we actually have private sector capital moving. And focus on youth. The youth, this is the defining issue of their generation, the idea of taking climate action. And so we have to continue to figure out ways to harness that energy for progress. So thank you all for your wise insights today.
Thank you very much for your great contribution for this session. Let me conclude this session. With the aim of contributing to the creation of a resilient and sustainable world and to help minimize pandemic risks in the future, IGES has already started and will continue to lead research on the implementation of COVID-19, as well as making recommendations for effective multilateral and multi-layered response and recovery, considering the three building blocks of the Triple R framework, as I already mentioned. Working with domestic and international partners, as today we have the CBD, Executive Secretary, we have a Vice President of Asian Development Bank, we have the President and CEO of IISD, and we are further strengthening our collaboration on this regard. And then we also try to further develop, to visualize the image of our society, particularly after the COVID-19. This is a very important aspect for us to further consider and to develop and to collaborate with all of these various stakeholders. So I would like to take this opportunity to ask if you have some questions or the comments. I can invite a question from the participants or not? No. Okay, so thank you very much. Then I would like to conclude this session, although the time is still until the 12:30, but I would like to thank all the speakers for your valuable contribution to this plenary session 1 on how we could try to integrate the biodiversity, climate, and SDGs. And this, I would like to ask you to continue to discuss and to collaborate with us, and hoping that I could see all of you in Kunming, China, for the occasion of the COP on biological diversity. Thank you very much.
ご登壇者の皆様、ありがとう。
Thank you very much, speakers and discussants. With this, the plenary session 1 is concluded. Plenary session 2, the dialogue with IGES President will be starting from 1300 sharp Japan time, or 9 a.m. GMT. Please come back to this website at 1300 Japan Standard Time. Thank you.